So we're back here with the portrait drawing video, and where we left off was trying to get a likeness here through line. And we started with very simple sketchy lines in the beginning to get a placement and construct, and we kept our lines nice and straight as we start to develop shapes. And we left off with a likeness. It's not exact, but it's very, very close. So as we start to take this to the next level, what I'll be looking to do is starting to put more exact shapes in here and start to really render and add in values to make this look very much like this young girl. So before we were using a 2B pencil, okay? And the 2B is nice because it goes down nice and sketchy and it can go down dark. And so when we are still mapping out these shapes, we want to also be able to erase things easily. And so with our eraser, the 2B erases much easier and cleaner than a harder pencil like an HB, a 2H, or an H, right? So an H will go down and it'll go down naturally lighter with less with the same amount of effort, and this is the same amount of effort with a 2B. So there is a significant difference, and that's why we want to hold off a little bit when we start to use the harder pencils. We will do that in the later stages. So it's at this point where I'm going to start to refine my shapes, and as I'm refining them, I am going to start to lay in some of the darker areas. Okay, and this can be done in different ways. What I like to do is block in where the darker values are in what is more of a mass. So rather than go in and put in a lot of variety in the beginning, or rather than pushing my darkest dark really, really quickly, what I'm gonna do is just lay down a nice big coat, basically, to get things started. And so the sharper your pencil, the cleaner this will go down. The other reason why I don't jump into my darkest darks quite yet is because things are still going to move a little bit. Like, I'm still figuring out where things go. And when you go to and push your pencil to its darkest dark, it can be much harder to erase. So we don't want to do that too quickly. We really just want to sort of know where everything goes first. And we can be a little creative with this if we want to, especially with hair, but I'm just going to show this very basic method. In a way, this is similar to laying down the dead or local color when we do painting in the still life. And I just lay down some big masses and get a feel for things. I'm going to kind of also ignore the lower half of this portrait, the doll and such, and just really focus on her. And I do have this camera kind of blocking my vision a little bit to give you guys the most square view. So bear with me if things look a little bit different. I am looking at it from a slight angle, whereas I should be standing more directly in front of this where the camera is, which is what you would do if you're doing this at home. Stand directly square in front of your work. Okay, so I'm leaving out sort of this blonde hair, a little bit of this blonde hair here, and I could have left out a little bit here, really just sort of marking places of things. And then there are a couple things you can do. If you want this to look really nice and smooth, you can take what's known as a stomp and go ahead and push this the graphite into the paper a little bit, and I'll show you how to do that. So there are different types of stomps. This is one I had on hand. It's kind of big and fat. And so what we can do is sort of try and use the side of the stomp a little bit. You see what's happening here? Sort of smushing it around, almost as if I took my finger and blended. It's pushing this soft, malleable graphite into the paper. You don't have a lot of control over the values that happen here. Like, it's going darker, right? And I could make it go lighter and darker by adding and subtracting. But what I mean by that is, when you stomp something, you basically have to just stomp it and then let it go and not stomp again, because there isn't as much control as there is when we continue to refine with the pencil after. So you do want to be very careful. You don't want to get out of control here and change your shapes by accident or anything like that. And then you can take either a smaller stomp, or you can go in with the tip and kind of just very carefully smush some of this into the paper. Now the point of this is to get a uniform beginning, but it's not about making a nice smooth layer. We can see it goes lighter, darker, it's still a little splotchy, but what we no longer see is that bright white of the paper on the indents of the tooth, right, coming through. So basically, when I went in with my pencil, my 2B, and I was laying down that graphite, I was hitting more of the surface, right? But the stomp, what it does is it pushes that graphite down into the crevices a little bit more. So we don't end up having as much contrast, and it gives us a smoother place to start. What we don't want to do too much of, or hardly any at all, is to take this into the halftones of our drawing, because like I said, it gets a little bit messy. So you can hear the airplanes flying overhead. That's because we had the air show this week in Jacksonville. Sorry, it gets a little bit loud. This also does not work as well if you're using a harder pencil. So the fact that I used a 2B to lay down the graphite in the beginning is what's really making this work. So I'm starting to put in a hint of some of these halftones, okay? And it's only a hint because I haven't set my value scale yet. I haven't put in my darkest darks. So anything that I put down here is only relative to what I've sort of started. So rather than sneak up and then have to like re-push the darks and re-push the lights and go back and forth like a seesaw, I'm really just going to put in a hint of some of this structural value and then come back to it after I set my darkest darks. Definitely not trying to go darker anywhere than necessary, but sometimes that happens. Like up in that forehead a little bit. So that's about as much as I want to do with that. The next thing that I'm going to do is I could take either my HB pencil, which is kind of short, and I can go in and sort of fill in some of these dots, or I could take a 2H or an H, which I have an H, and start to fill in some of those areas to smooth them out. But the smartest thing, actually, that I can do is to set my darkest darks early so that any values that I continue to put down will relate and be more accurate than if they were just guessing. So what I'm gonna do is start to set, I'm gonna set the darkest dark on her coat. Her coat is by far the darkest value. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna be a little sort of design oriented with this. I'm not gonna fill in her entire coat. I'm just going to hint at it. And you can see how much darker this is than the hair, the initial hairline. Again, I'm back to using my 2B. And my pencil is nice and sharp, so make sure that you watch that pencil sharpening video. Now what I'm going to show you guys too is not a sketchy portrait, right? So this could continue along this road and be very sketchy and more fun. What I'm going to show you is how to make it look more realistic with maybe a little hint of artistic fun here and there. But I know a lot of you guys are interested in learning how to make things look more real right now, so that's what I'm gonna do for you. So I'm sort of sneaking up to this a little bit. I'm not going in and pushing with all my might because the pencil could break. I could score the paper. Also, you can start to see that I'm not really getting into the tooth, the lowest crevices of this paper very well. So even though I have a sharp pencil and even though I'm going at different angles, I'm still not getting in there very well. So that's where the stomp can really help get us started. So this coat really blends into the hair at some points too. So I'm gonna make that happen. But here we go. So I got that laid down. Now I'm gonna go back in with my next layer and purposely push a little harder. It's really interesting how dark a 2B pencil can go. You do not need to jump all the way into like the 9B or however dark the pencil set goes. If you just have patience with your 2B. So on the photo that you're copying or the subject that you're drawing, you want to find definitely what your darkest area is and start there. And a good thing that you can do too is definitely make yourself a value scale with graphite first. So I've done that. I've done that a long time ago. And if you make one, you do want your tiles to be very smooth, smoother than this. And it'll help you to get to know your pencil better. It'll help you get to know the darks that can be achieved and the lights that can be achieved, how smooth you can get, differences between the grades of pencil, how to not break your pencil lead by going nice and slow like this. But you can also tape it up on the top of your drawing to help you as a guide. You know, this is as dark as the pencil can go, so let's make sure we go dark enough, because a lot of times I'm in class and that ends up being the thing that comes out of my mouth. Darker, go darker, go darker. It's crazy. So that can really, really sort of eliminate that. That boundary. At this point, I'm not doing anything really like hatching or trying to go in any certain direction. I'm really just trying to fill in nice and smooth these areas on the paper. And like I said, the coat area is the darkest, so I'm working to try and make this pencil go as dark as it possibly can, and then I will work off of that. So it's like you're setting your value scale and working off of it rather than sneaking up to it for hours and hours and hours until you finally hit it. So obviously all these darks get really dark up in here. Her hair is not light. So keep going over this same area, different directions. So you can kind of also see that this would be hard to erase, right? It would be really hard to go back to the light of the paper. So that's also why we want to be pretty sure of our shapes and things like that. Probably should have mapped out this hair a little bit better prior to doing this, but since this hair, I feel like I could fudge that a little bit. Okay. Almost dark enough. You can also see that, technically speaking, I'm holding my pencil very firm and I'm grounding my hand on the page. This really, really helps. You know, you don't want to put a bunch of fingerprints all over the place, but grounding your hand really helps. Okay, a couple things. If I was to go in here and stomp this now, the graphite or the lead would actually lift off. So it's really important when you set your darkest dark to just leave it be. Sometimes we'll have to, you know, go back and reinstate it if we think we can go a little bit darker. You know, if you're transporting your drawing or anything like that, sometimes the graphite can get wiped off. So we just want to make sure that doesn't happen. Now I don't want to spend this whole video just on the hair, but let's see. I do want to make sure. I'm just gonna map out this little head here in case later I want to do it. I don't know, not in the video, but since it is so light. Okay. Now using this darkest dark, we can then judge the rest of the darks around it. So now I know that this hair can go a lot darker. I'm also starting to see that my pencil needs to be sharpened again. So I'm going to do that real quick and come right back. So my pencil is more sharpened now. That should allow me to get in a little bit better with more control. So you know what? There's so much hair here that I need to set the value scale to before I get to the face. So I'm just gonna work kind of this way real quick and do it so that you guys don't have to waste this whole video watching it. Okay, so this took about an hour and a half, so I'm glad that I didn't go and try and show you that entire thing. And it's easy to summarize. So what I did was I darkened this area to as dark as the 2B pencil could possibly go. And I did that in an effort to match what was happening over here. From there, I went up and tried to darken this entire thing in a way that stair-stepped outside of sort of the value scale. So went from the darkest to the next darkest went from the darkest to lighter to lighter to lighter to lightest. And the whole time I'm comparing the relationships between the two. So I'm looking at the value contrast from here to here and trying to judge the value contrast here. And so that's the summary of describing, what this hour and a half took. And it takes a while because you're laying down a lot of graphite, and you can't just, go in real quick and expect it to be the right value. It takes some adjusting. So it's at this point then that I want to start to refine some of the halftones and the features of the face. And I'm going to take an H, which is a harder pencil, and use that to start to add some variety to the halftones and some soft edges. So the other thing is that this is very, very sharp, sharply sharpened. So what it does is it helps me to be nice and delicate, especially working out of shadow shapes. So for example, we have this shadow shape here, and there are tiny value shifts that are happening in here. And so what's nice about this grade pencil is that I can mimic those easier. And edges are really important at this point. So as I'm looking at the edge of this shadow shape here, I'm aware of how sharp it should be. I mean, how not sharp it should be, how sharp it looks now, and how it should really transition to meet the rest of the face. It's not isolated, it is a part of the face. I know that up here gets a little darker. down here where the cheek meets the eye. It's also a softer transition. So I'm going to do a little bit of this, and then I'm going to zoom in really close so you guys can see how to refine it even more. Right now, I'm just looking at value relationships, looking at laying in sort of that first pass. Looking at the fall of light, so it's lighter on these planes that are facing the sky in this outdoor scene, and darker on the sides and undersides of things. So side would be darker, underside, where the nose comes in versus where the nose comes in versus where the nose pops out, right? So where it pops out, it's receiving more light. Where the lip sticks out versus where it's sort of tucked under or more vertical. And the fall of light down in here, so the entire chin area is receiving less light than the upper part of the face. So initially I kind of go in and try and set that value, and I'm trying to be clean about it in terms of mark making. My goal for this video for you guys is to show you how to make it very, very smooth. And in another video, I'll show you how to make more of a sketchy portrait. One thing I'm not sure if I'm going to do, and I won't do it in the video because it'll take a long time, is to put something in the background, because I really like this dark contrast against her profile, and I think the drawing is missing something without it, so we'll see if that's what the finished product looks like. Okay, so in order for these halftones in the face to work, the darkest shadows need to be dark enough. So I am going to reinstate them. I'm going to go back to my 2B, which is my softest, darkest pencil. Just push them so their values match better. So the eyelash area should be darker than this area up here, minus right underneath the brow, which is the darkest part. In here, this shadow can get a little bit darker in the nostril, and then down in here, slightly ajar mouth and upper lip can get a little bit darker as well. And then the lower lip on the underside and then underneath the chin for sure. Can go darker. So you can see I'm kind of like going through and then making sure that the face itself is surrounded by the right values so that all the darks are dark enough. So in here we'll go a little darker. And here we'll go a little darker. Just a tip on hair. When you have these tendrils like this, you want to think of them like ribbon. So where are they receiving the most light? When they're turned up. And then as they start to turn down, you have a little bit of a halftone. And then at their facing away from the light the most, they're their darkest. And then they start to get a little bit lighter before they then are their lightest again. In this case, it goes a little bit darker before the tendril sort of kicks up again at the last moment, which will be light there. I'm looking at not having too much contrast in this area. So if I darken one area, sometimes it influences an area nearby. So it is a little bit of catch-up. Okay, now at this point, I can feel more comfortable about the values that are happening close to the hair. And what's happening sort of all over. The underside of the chin turns away, so it gets darker. The sides of the chin get darker than the part that would be turned up a little bit. Okay, and this is pretty good because you can see in the video how there are some areas that are looking a little more dot-like, right? You can see these dots in here. So in one of my previous charcoal videos, I showed how to turn your eraser into a little sort of dot picker. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to work at lifting some of those darkest dots away. Oops, sometimes you can't quite get to them. That's okay, we can go back. If you take up too much graphite around the area, you can just go back and fill it back in. This is how we would start to execute that really smooth skin tone look. In school, we called this dot filling. It's definitely more of a technical term, and it can become very sort of meditative if you let it. So it's a good idea to work on one area at a time. Until it looks finished. So if I move around too much, I will never finish anything. So you really just want to focus.